Mr. Van Meter, you're first. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to speak briefly about the rail program in Springfield, which is critical to this community. And the story that I'd like to tell, take you back to your college years for just a minute. I think you may remember in college that econ professor, poli-sci professor, talked to you about how greedy businessmen were only interested in their own self-interest, and so in acting in their own self-interest, they sometimes created these problems called externalities. And that's why we needed government to step in and correct these externalities. The externality I'd like to talk to you about is an externality caused by government. The creation of the intermodal system up in Joliet is a wonderful, wonderful new project for the state of Illinois. But that intermodal system up in Joliet is creating an externality down the line on the train corridor that runs to St. Louis. And Springfield is suffering from that externality, a great increase in train traffic through Springfield. I think that the Union Pacific Railroad, to their credit, at the time that the intermodal plant was developed, realized that there was going to be this increased train traffic through Springfield, and proposed, as part of the high-speed rail plan, a mediation plan for Springfield that involved a lot of flying streets running over the 3rd Street corridor. But unfortunately, the money didn't materialize or fortunately, the money didn't materialize to realize that vision. But we really need the government's help the federal government's help to remediate the externality that's developed because of the intermodal system that the federal government helped to fund up in Joliet. And we're hoping that you will understand that the problem we have here in Springfield is a direct extension of the development that was originally created up in Joliet. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Frederickson.
Good morning. On behalf of 30,000 colleagues at ADM, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all today. And given that our agriculture is the single largest spender of freight on the railroad, I think it's important for you to hear some of our thoughts and comments about transportation and explain to you the effects that we feel on having an effective, efficient transportation network at ADM. So by way of introduction, ADM, and you heard from my colleagues earlier, the mayor did quite a great job, and the city manager did a great job telling my story also. But we buy a lot of crops from many farmers around the world, sell them and transport them to more than 265,000 processing facilities. We process them into thousands of food ingredients, animal feeds, and other products used by millions of customers every day. In the process, we also help Illinois farmers gain access to markets not only hundreds of miles away, but hundreds of even thousands and tens of thousands miles away, and that in general helps Illinois. Transportation is a link that connects each stage of our operations, which is important for us to have a massive transportation system, which includes 2,400 barges, 4,000 ocean-going vessels, 1,800 trucks and trailers, and 27,000 plus rail cars. To give you an example, we are one of the largest agriculture companies, or we pay the largest agricultural freight bill on all Class 1 railroads. Transportation is very important to us. Some $2 billion annually we spend. To give you an example, in Decatur, Illinois, some 300 rail cars of raw material come into the facility each day, and 300 rail cars of finished products leave that facility, not including all the other substrates that it takes to produce our products. That's just in Decatur, and as I said, we have 265 processing plants located around the world. Expertise in logistics, access to multiple modes of transportation are part of what enable ADM to keep products moving to customers and to continue purchasing crops from farmers even during the last historical drought and the current overwhelming rains and floods that we're seeing today. This is why we regularly invest and expand our size of our network to enhance logistical capabilities. As you heard earlier today, our latest local investment is one that could convincingly transform not just the local rail shippers relationship, but also the economy of Greater Decatur and Southern Illinois. Working closely with the Departments of Commerce, Economic Opportunity, local governments, container companies, and railroads, we've developed what we call something that's real strategic for our location, strategic for ADM because of its expertise, and it will help enhance movements of these 17 million containers that are 17 million containers that are always moving in the world today. This should allow market access to almost any time and anywhere from local Central Illinois. So enhancing an opportunity for our company, for our other local businessmen, and for the community, we are transforming a railcar storage yard near Decatur, Illinois, headquartered next to our facility, to what we call an inland port. We've run interchange tracks to allow two Class I railroads to talk to one another, and before they couldn't. We convinced a third Class I railroad to communicate and get trackage rights over one railroad, that allowing them to communicate to one another. We've constructed this massive loading ramp, installed two cranes that will handle 1.5 million tons of freight per year with significant room for expansion. This facility's capabilities, its access to three Class I railroads, the access to Decatur, Bloomington, Champaign, and Springfield, and its location near an enterprise zone in Decatur International Airport, all gives us optimism about the potential for container freight to become a thriving business in our area. The development of an inland port was substantial investment on our part, and we're proud to do it. But ultimately, our success not just lies in our willingness to invest, but we need better access for our region. We also need governments to work with the railroads to promote better access, fair competition for all market and all market participants. Here's an example of what I mean. Historically, large railroads have acquired and sold off operations to smaller short-line railroads. They've also imposed these so-called paper barriers to competition. These barriers typically include excessive costs on operation restrictions or inhibit fair, open competition, and they're usually permanent. They last forever. One of our large Midwestern soybean plants, for example, is physically served by a Class I railroad and a short line. While the short line is allowed to bring soybeans into the plant, it can't deliver finished products, which are oil and meal, to competing markets like Chicago and Peoria. This creates numerous issues for the plant operation, and it's completely unnecessary. We see restrictions like these as fundamentally anti-competitive practices that government should work to prevent. So in conclusion, as this committee and Congress look at ways to improve market access for companies at all types, and especially here down in this downstate area, we're hoping you will work and consider the question of how to ensure fairness, open market access, and robust competition amongst rail marketplaces. Once again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, it's on now. Very good. I should know how to do this. Thank you, Chairman Denham. Thank you, Congresswoman Brown and Congressman Davis. On behalf of Governor Pat Quim, I want to welcome you to the great state of Illinois, to our wonderful capital city, historic capital city, in fact, and this magnificent Capitol building. I know that you're here for a very short time, but this is a very historic structure. It was built in the 1880s. If you get a chance, you should take a look. It's amazing what they did then. I also think it's fitting and appropriate that you came to Springfield for this particular hearing, given that this is Lincoln's hometown, as Congresswoman Brown mentioned. 151 years ago, President Lincoln created the Transcontinental Railroad, and that changed the shape and economic destiny of our country. And I just think it's so appropriate that this committee is here today. I also wanted to personally congratulate you, Mr. Chair, on your appointment to being chair of this very important committee, and the work that lays ahead I know is going to be very challenging, but I know based on the fact that you're having all of these hearings, you understand the importance not only in California but also across the country, and I'm glad to be able to talk to you about the success of your investments here in Illinois to date. I know that yesterday you were in Chicago to talk about the CREATE program. And as you heard, that program is critically important to the nation's freight network. Illinois is the rail hub of the Midwest and the nation. We have 7,300 miles of rail here in Illinois, and all 7 Class I railroads operate in our state. That helps to connect not only the Midwest, but also the nation to continental and global marketplaces. CREATE also plays an important role in intercity passenger rail. You may have heard about some of the projects yesterday that will increase the reliability and movement of high-speed intercity passenger rail and intercity passenger rail in general. And that is why Governor Quinn, working with the Illinois General Assembly, has committed $850 million from Illinois Jobs Now to create the high-speed intercity passenger rail program and our regular intercity passenger rail program. Intercity passenger rail service is an important component of the state's multimodal transportation system, and I'm sure you've heard about that all across the country. You know, the transportation system does function as a system. It's not just roads and bridges, it's not just airports, it's not just railroads. It all works together. Even our inland waterways here in the Midwest are an important component of our transportation system. And just like with the freight railroads in Illinois, Chicago serves as a hub for intercity passenger rail. In fact, last year there were 2.2 million passengers on trains in Illinois, with 1.8 million passengers on the state-supported routes. And we brought a chart with us over here, to the left here, for you to look at. And I want to point out that since 2006, ridership is up more than 92%. And looking at just the Chicago to St. Louis corridor, where we received a federal stimulus grant to bring high-speed intercity passenger rail service to that corridor, our ridership has increased by 224% since 2006. And that increase has occurred despite construction on that route and prior to the implementation of faster trains on new equipment. Intercity passenger rail is an important transportation alternative to our downstate communities. I think you heard that from the mayors that were on the panel before us and also from Chairman Van Meter here. It is serving as a catalyst for economic development and growth in our downstate communities, and I know Congressman Davis is aware of this. Our trains serve many of our public and private university campus communities. And I want to point out in Macomb, which is home of Western Illinois University, the university has seen on-campus car registrations drop from 80% to 60% since they built a transit transfer center right across the street from the Amtrak station. And in Normal, where Illinois State University is located, the city's new multimodal station is the centerpiece of the community, and it has helped to leverage $200 million in private investment around that station. That model is now being emulated in other station communities on our entire Illinois system. Again, as you've heard from the mayors on the prior panel, they see intercity passenger rail as an important component of the fabric of their cities. New multimodal stations are planned for Alton, Moline, Rockford, Freeport, and Joliet. You heard from Champaign, the home of the University of Illinois. They completed their new multimodal station a few years ago, and it is serving as a hub there and has helped to make that the 3rd largest ridership station in the state. Here in Springfield, as you heard from Mayor Houston and Chairman Van Meter, high-speed intercity passenger rail is the impetus for rail consolidation, which has been in the works for almost 30 years here in Springfield. The governor has committed $8.65 million towards design engineering to keep that project moving forward, and we're committed to working with the city and the county at the Illinois Department of Transportation to help them identify additional funding sources to complete that design engineering. The state is also funding Tier 2 engineering for the Chicago to Joliet segment of the high-speed rail corridor, a rail flyover south of the city of Springfield, and the Alton to St. Louis segment, including the bridge over the Mississippi River. When the first phase of high-speed rail is done on the Chicago to St. Louis segment, sometime in late 2015, we anticipate a 30-minute decrease in travel time between Chicago and St. Louis. And by the end of 2017, when we complete that corridor, we anticipate a 1-hour drop in travel time, going from 5.5 to 4.5 hours. That's a significant change. The governor and the General Assembly have also ensured our continued service by appropriating $38 million for our next fiscal year for Amtrak operating assistance pursuant to PREA Section 209. So according to PREA Section 209, we will be able to continue the valuable service that we have here in the state of Illinois. We are also expanding intercity passenger rail here in Illinois. Part of the federal stimulus program provided $177 million for providing new service from Chicago to the Quad Cities, and the state is matching those dollars with $45 million from the Illinois Jobs Now capital program. The state is also in the process of investing Illinois Jobs Now funds to add service from Chicago to Butte, Iowa, through Rockford, where we are also investing in a new multimodal station just south of downtown. For both Rockford and the Quad Cities, this will be the first time in 30 years that they've had passenger rail service from Chicago, and those are important links, not only to the city of Chicago, but also for those campus communities along those corridors as well. I also wanted to make sure that I thank you and the members of the T&I committee for providing funds for the equipment purchase through the federal stimulus program. Working with the California Department of Transportation, we are procuring PREA Section 305 compliant equipment. 130 passenger cars are being built right here in Illinois at a Nippon Sharyo factory located in Rochelle, which is in the north central part of the state. That has created 250 jobs. And recently, Nippon Sharyo just announced an expansion of that facility to add 80 more jobs. These are brand new jobs that are here in the United States and here in Illinois. That wouldn't have happened without the investment in the high-speed rail program.
And Secretary, we'd ask you to wrap it up.
Okay. I also wanted to point out real quickly that we are chosen as the lead state for the locomotive procurement. We are again partnering with Caltrans, Washtrans, Michigan, and Missouri. And finally, we are also partnering with Michigan and Indiana, with Michigan as the lead state, on a study to bring 110-mile-per-hour service to the entire Chicago to Detroit corridor. Clearly, Illinois is still moving quickly on its high-speed rail vision, a vision that Governor Quinn is passionate about and shares with the President. So I want to again thank you, Chairman Denham, and the members of the committee for coming here today and hearing about what's going on in Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Schneider. Representative Kretz.
Thank you, Chairman Denham, Ranking Member Brown, and Congressman Davis. I am Illinois State Representative Elaine Nekritz, but I'm here today actually as chair of the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, or MIPRC. We are a legislatively established compact adopted in 10 Midwestern states to promote, coordinate, and support regional improvements to passenger rail. Secretary Schneider is one of Quinn's designees to MIPRC, and also in the audience is our Executive Director, Laura Cleaver. Passenger rail is necessarily an interstate endeavor, and intercity passenger rail plays a critical role in the Midwest transportation network. Our experience provides strong evidence that our constituents increasingly want the option to take a train. Ridership in the Midwest has been growing rapidly, as you heard from Secretary Schneider. In FY 2012, ridership on the 9 Midwestern corridor routes combined was almost 3.2 million, double the number of riders that on those routes in FY 2004. Our 5-year growth from FY 2007 to FY 2012 was 35%. So to continue this record of growth, MIPRC supports 4 things: PREA funding, Amtrak funding, a federal-state funding partnership that other modes of transportation enjoy, and investment in our freight rail partners. The importance of PREA to meet the growing demand for passenger rail cannot be overstated. Funds made available under PREA through the Federal High-Speed Intercity Passenger Rail Program in 2009 and 2010 are allowing the Midwest to implement faster, more frequent passenger rail service. The funds awarded to Illinois and Michigan have already enabled 110-mile-an-hour service on portions of the Chicago to St. Louis corridors, as well as the Chicago to Detroit corridors. On-time performance improved dramatically along the St. Louis to Kansas City corridor by addressing key choke points along that route. Planning and environmental work on several other Midwestern corridors, Chicago to Minneapolis, Minneapolis to Duluth, and Chicago to Omaha, has been made possible through the federal-state partnership provided for intercity passenger rail under PREA. The Midwest is purchasing new equipment, as Secretary Schneider mentioned, that will not only provide a more enjoyable experience for riders, but will reduce operating costs on 8 of the interstate corridors, and much of that equipment will stay in the Midwest. So we have a lot of really exciting projects underway in our region, but we want to ask to make sure that you consider authority and funding for state and regional planning. Multi-state planning and coordination have been really a very fundamental aspect of our region's success. So it's challenging to prioritize and harmonize a significant number of high-value projects, but planning is necessary to lead to greater efficiency and a higher return on our investment going forward. Second, we support ongoing grant authority and funding for Amtrak's operating general capital and debt service, along with some accompanying reforms. This is an essential component of all the Midwestern states' continued success in developing faster, more frequent passenger rail service. Third, MIPRC supports a federal-state partnership for passenger rail similar to other modes of transportation. Passenger rail is generally the best option for transporting people who are going between 100 and 600 miles. It's also often the best transportation mode in certain types of weather and under emergency situations. That continued reliable capital investment is key to the success of all transportation modes, and passenger rail is no different. Another essential aspect for rail for Illinois and the Midwest is our state's partnership with our freight railroads. Almost all of our region's plans for improved passenger rail service are implemented on existing rail lines, and that's allowed us to make these significant improvements to service at a cost and on a time frame many times less than what entirely new service and corridors would cost. And I just want to briefly throw in a promotion for CREATE as well. You know, even though we're the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, we recognize the benefits of CREATE, and we think that that's a really important program for the federal government to continue to support. And finally, while it's not particularly within this committee's purview, we ask that as leaders in Congress, you support funding for passenger rail in the fiscal year 2014 budget. High-speed rail programs have not received an appropriation since FY 2010, and those funds are needed to continue capital improvements, pursuing our multi-state planning, which is critically important for us to build our regional system, and for assisting states in implementing Section 209 of PREA. And while Illinois was able to fund that for PREA, it was a real struggle for us to be able to do that, to find an additional $10 million in our budget for that increase. And doesn't sound like a lot even in the state of Illinois' world, but given our financial situation, an additional $10 million was really, really big for Amtrak. So thank you so much for your leadership in helping to define a federal role in passenger rail development, and MIPRC looks forward to continuing to be a partner in that regard.
Thank you. Mr. Barkin.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Brown, and Congressman Davis. I want to thank you for the opportunity to participate in this discussion today. As was stated, I'm a professor at in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. But I also serve as the executive director of the Rail Transportation and Engineering Center at the university, as well as director of the National University Rail Center, which is led by the university. And so all of these things sort of combine to make me particularly interested in the objectives of this subcommittee. I'd like to say at the outset that my opinions are my own. They don't necessarily represent those of the University of Illinois. Now, I was asked to participate today to address 2 points, the benefits and feasibility of high-speed rail service in central and southern Illinois, and issues or concerns that I might see in relation to the capabilities or limitation of our freight rail system in the region. With the Chairman's permission, I would also like to briefly address a third point, the need to continue focusing public and private sector attention on rebuilding academic rail programs so that we can rebuild the technical expertise needed for the rail workforce of the 21st century. With regard to passenger rail in Illinois, I believe that we need to continue investment in development of improved service quality, frequency, and speed in suitable corridors, such as the Chicago-St. Louis corridor and several others that have been discussed today. These investments should be based on realistic projected ridership expectations, but with an understanding that improved quality will generate new ridership, as evidenced by the charts displayed in the room today and has been experienced elsewhere in the U.S. and around the world. These investments should be part of a balanced, integrated, multimodal system of public transportation that not only includes Illinois, but the entire Midwest region. These investments should involve federal, state, and municipal governments working in creative new ways, such as Congressman Davis referred to engage the private sector in these investments by helping reduce private sector risk and encouraging financing approaches that take advantage of the value created by the investment in safe, comfortable, convenient, and economic public transportation systems. It's critically important that such investments in expanded operations do not negatively affect the freight rail system. The U.S. benefits tremendously from the safety, environmental, and economic benefits of having the best freight railroad system in the world, and development of new passenger rail services, whether they be commuter, conventional intercity, or high-speed rail, should not jeopardize the success of this system, nor inhibit its further growth. So an important role of government should be to pursue policies that will encourage partnerships between potential passenger rail operators and the freight railroads so that both parties benefit. Regarding freight, as I just mentioned, rail freight is critically important not only to Illinois but to the region and to the nation. Manufacturing and agriculture are significant elements of our state's economy, and both of these sectors are critically dependent on reliable, economical rail transport, which allows our products to compete in both the domestic and the international marketplace. Illinois railroads are part of a national network, and two of the nation's largest hubs, Chicago and St. Louis, are in or adjacent to our state. When considering the performance of this network, it's vital to understand the importance of these hubs because that is where trains originate and depart. Any congestion due to excessive conflicting traffic or inadequate capacity can quickly clog the entire system. And that's why investment in the CREATE project that's already been mentioned is a vital element of continued success of our rail system. And it's important not only to the Chicago region, but to the state and, again, the national network as well. These investments will help all parties concerned with safe, efficient transportation, whether they are passenger or freight railroads, better accomplish their objectives. We also need to be careful to promote policies that continue to encourage private sector investment in the nation's freight rail system. And I believe that we can accomplish this by letting railroads participate in the marketplace with as little regulatory burden as feasible and reducing subsidies to less efficient competitors. Finally, I'd like to speak for a few moments about the importance of rail education in our nation's schools and universities. For more than 5 decades, our higher education institutions have placed extensive focus on educating young engineers and transportation professionals in highway transport. As a consequence, we've developed an extensive, highly skilled workforce with world-class expertise in this area. However, we accomplish this at the expense of educating them in other modes, including railroads. Several years ago, a highway colleague of mine estimated there are approximately 100 times more funding going to highway education and research programs in the U.S. than there are to rail. As a consequence, we have far fewer professors and their students with sufficient education and understanding of the principles of railway engineering and transport than are needed. This is particularly ironic when we consider the renaissance that both the freight and the passenger rail systems are experiencing in this country. An important element of the success is development of new state-of-the-art freight and passenger rail technologies, and these technologies require extensive specialized expertise, but we lack the educational infrastructure to replenish this generation of rail professionals as they retire every day. Railroads estimate that as many as 50% of their managers will be eligible to retire in the next 5 years. Transportation professionals agree that we need a balanced transportation system. To achieve this, we need a balanced transportation education system. Federal and state DOTs invest heavily in education and research that supports highway transport. We need to expand the amount of investment in other modes, education in other modes, including rail, so that we can rebuild the technical expertise needed for the rail workforce of the 21st century. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Barkin. Mr. Powell.
Thank you very much, Chairman Denneman, Ranking Member Brown, and Congressman Davis. Thank you very much for your time today. It's an honor to be here. I'm Eric Powell. I'm Manager of Intermodal and Economic Development for the Indiana Railroad. I'm here on behalf of Tom Hoback, our founder, president, and CEO, who unfortunately fell ill over the weekend and sends his regrets that he couldn't attend. Don't let the name of our company fool you. Even though we started in Indiana, we've served Illinois businesses since our first day of operation in 1986. We haul the equivalent of 800,000 truckloads of freight every year. And a large number of Eastern Illinois companies are our customers, so obviously Illinois is very important to us. I think the subcommittee for everything you do in Washington, especially with the Section 45G railroad maintenance credits, helps us invest in our infrastructure and better serve our customers. One important thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't only benefit the railroads. It benefits or creates supply chain efficiencies for Illinois businesses and fosters economic development. So really it benefits all of us. Indiana Railroad is one of 36 smaller railroads that serve Illinois. Most of the railroad lines in Illinois, like ours, regional or short line railroads, once upon a time were part of larger class 1s. In a previous era, railroads such as ours, the track was in very bad shape, received very little investment, and headed for abandonment due mostly to heavy regulations or government-subsidized competition. As you know, Congress lifted that regulatory burden in 1980 with the Staggers Act, and rail renaissance ensued right after that. And frankly, without the Staggers Act, without deregulation, the Indiana Railroad would not exist. This is because we wouldn't be able to attract capital investment. It's also because the regulations that were in place pre-Staggers made it impossible for us to act like an entrepreneurial business. Indiana Railroad, we live by 4 principles. We earn our customers' trust by doing what we say we're going to do. Starts with returning phone calls. We invest ahead of the growth curve with an eye towards the future. We empower our people with a sense of leadership and entrepreneurialism, and we do all that, of course, with safety in mind, top of mind, I should say. We have a vested interest here also because we're local. All 185 of our employees live in Indiana or Illinois, so we're passionate about growing the local economy. When we started the Indiana Railroad in 1986, we moved 12,000 carloads of freight that year. That number today has swelled almost 15-fold, about 170 to 180,000 a year, depending on how the economy goes. And you can see our numbers in Exhibit 1 with my comments will give you an idea of just how important we are to moving the Illinois economy and also how important it is to us. In addition to the major employers in Exhibit 1, you'll notice 2 new customers that we have in Newton, Illinois, a small town east of Effingham, a steel company, and a biodiesel plant. We've had a lot of success on both sides of the Indiana-Illinois border in attracting manufacturing and distribution facilities to our railroad, and we have some other good prospects in the pipeline. I think part of the reason for this is because regional and shoreline railroads are a little bit better equipped to offer superior service to customers than the larger railroads, simply because we're more nimble. We have be a little more flexible. And honestly, in some respects, I think we're almost as or more flexible than the trucking industry is right now, simply because of the new hours of service laws coming down for trucking with high driver turnover. It's forcing a lot of trucking companies to focus on local regional routes, whereas we can move freight from Newton, Illinois, Palestine, Illinois, Robinson, Illinois, anywhere in the United States, Canada, or Mexico, thanks to the network. We interchange with CN at Newton and every other railroad in Chicago. And as I mentioned, thanks to those connections, we keep about 800,000 heavy trucks off the highways. It comes at a price, though. Railroad is the most capital-intensive industry. We have to invest about 25% of our earnings just to maintain the status quo. In 2012, we invested $11 million of our own money in our infrastructure. 2011, we invested $22 million. And again, that was all public money. Overall, we've invested about $160 million since we were founded. So we are committed to reinvestment, but we still fight an uphill battle to replace bridges and renew components such as rail and ties and maintain grade crossings. And again, to help with that, I know Congress enacted 45G for the first time in 2004. Right now, Representative Davis is a big proponent of that for us. We thank you very much. And we just ask that you continue to deliver your support for 45G. It's common sense, it's pro-growth, and it's a very pro-transportation policy. And we promise to do our part to reinvest that money if it comes back to us. As I said earlier, we are committed to safe, reliable transportation for Illinois and keeping, saving money, frankly, for Illinois taxpayers by taking trucks off the highway. So again, I thank you very much for your support of 45G. Without it, without everything you do to improve transportation, we couldn't do our jobs. And I thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. Secretary Schneider, you talked about the Section 209 process. Just curious, with the PREA reauthorization coming up again, what have been some of the successes or challenges that you've dealt with state-supported routes?
I think under the PREA 209 section, we, as Representative Neckritz mentioned, struggled to add the additional money to the state-supported routes for our next fiscal year. And that money is really for only 9 months worth under PREA 209 because of the difference between the state and the federal fiscal year. So when we have to add the additional money in our next fiscal year, it could become an even greater challenge given the state's financial condition. I know that Representative Nekritz mentioned that. So I know that there was a proposal by the President to provide some sort of support for the PREA 209 states, and that's something that we would ask Congress to consider, not to relieve us of that responsibility, but to allow us to phase that in so that it doesn't have as a significant of an impact. And also, I think the other piece of that is the capital component piece under PREA 209. We're still going to try to negotiate that somewhat with Amtrak. We're still negotiating our agreement with Amtrak at this point. We're making good progress. Amtrak's been a good partner, but as with any partnership, there are some pains. And so we're trying to work through some of these very detailed issues about the capital piece of the PREA 209.
Thank you. And what's been your experiences, successes, as well as challenges working with the FRA?
The FRA has been a good partner for us, but I think where the challenges have surfaced for us is the reviews through the NEPA process. Since MAP 21 only addressed transit and highways, it did not address rail. When it came to those NEPA reviews, I think it has become a very it can slow things down, let me put it that way. I was talking to my staff responsible for this area before I came up here, and what he mentioned to me is what we're looking at on our high-speed rail corridor, for instance, is 50 feet on either side of the rail right-of-way, the existing rail right-of-way, and it has to go through numerous NEPA reviews before we can finally get that approved and into some type of record of decision, and that can serve to slow down what we're trying to accomplish.
And what do you think are some of the things that we could do to deliver these projects quicker?
Well, I think looking at some of the streamlining that was done under MAP 21 for the other two modes, extending those streamlining efforts, I think on the rail side would be helpful. But I think for the most part, the partnership with the FRA has been a good partnership. We've worked closely with them. I think also they faced a challenge in that when the stimulus program passed and the grants for the high-speed intercity passenger rail through PREA also took place, that they were not necessarily in a position to be a granting agency when this all first started evolving. And so I think they've grown and learned from the experiences that they've had. And I think it's evolved into working into a better approach at addressing these issues.
And would you find it helpful if different federal transportation agencies could use one another's categorical exclusions for environmental reviews?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And Mr. Frederickson, I wanted to see if you could briefly discuss your new intermodal project as well. I see ADM cars everywhere throughout the nation. What are some of the biggest challenges that you have either nationally or certain regions of the nation where you may have your cars that get
Sure.
stuck for undue periods of time?
Thank you. Talk two things about the inland port and what we've been talking about today. What was able to make that successful is getting all three Class 1 railroads to communicate with one another, not just physically, but the ability to listen and sit down and work through what's best for the local economy. And I fear that if it wasn't for ADM and the city and the local governments working together, that we would have never gotten them to a seat to listen. So just getting them to communicate. We talk about CREATE today. CREATE was successful simply because all the railroads wanted to make it work, or somebody forced their hands to make them work. I talk about open access. We grow our biggest facilities where we have multiple railroads or multiple levers or multiple means of transportation. I feel sorry for the single person who's sitting out there that has one mode of transportation in Timbuktu that can't get his voice heard. So growth, when we have competition and open access and free trade and a marketplace that's robust, it's evident within ADM that's where we spend our money. And in the inland port was a classic example of it, and working with government and private industry willing to spend that money to make it work. So it made good business sense, it made good governmental sense, but we just need to get everybody to communicate. You can't have $500 switching fee by one railroad and the other be $200. Why does it exist? Why aren't they consistent? Let alone, why is that same rate throughout the entire country? I mean, things like that need to be looked at. Why do paper barriers continue on perpetuity? Why aren't they limited for a period of time that allow them to get their head start or their investment back or whatever it took? Stuff like that just prohibits trade, prohibits growth, prohibits jobs. So, thank you.
Thank you. How about from a national perspective?
It's the same thing. I mean, there's only 7 Class I railroads, right? So it's all about access to markets and the ability for those railroads to communicate and get along and allow free access to markets and not limit.
Thank you. Ms. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a note of best practice. I represent the University of Florida, and all of our students ride the transportation system free, and they voted for it out of the student fees, and they was able to bond it. And this year, the state legislature added the community college, so that is something that we could start looking at, and I know some of the other schools in Florida are looking at it out of student fees, and that has taken thousands of cars away from the university, and it travels where the students want to travel, whether it's going to class or Friday nights or whatever. So that is something that we can look at. Mr. Van Meter, you gave a great analysis, but I didn't quite follow it. Can you?
Well, I guess it wasn't so good then.
It was a great story, but I didn't get the ending.
Well, the ending hasn't been written yet. I guess that was part of the point. The project started in Joliet with the intermodal system.
Right.
That's greatly increased the traffic on the rail line from Chicago to St. Louis, and it's doubling the traffic in Springfield, and it's doubling the length of the trains that run through Springfield, and that is essentially creating a Berlin Wall between the hotel I think you stayed in last night and the Capitol building. Mm-hmm. We've got to get the trains off 3rd Street. I think the Union Pacific Railroad, when they worked with the government to build the intermodal facility in Joliet, they realized that we were going to have a tremendous traffic problem on the 3rd Street corridor, and they proposed a solution. That solution got wrapped up into the high-speed rail program, but that solution was not really sensitive to the community's needs. They proposed to remediate 3rd Street. What we need to do is get the trains off 3rd Street, move to 10th Street. Now, with the help of Senator Durbin, the study that he helped get funded, the Federal Railroad Administration has appropriately indicated that 10th Street is the solution. But the problem starts, the train traffic problem starts with the intermodal system in Joliet, which was funded by the federal government. So my point is, partly funded by the federal government. So my point is, the problem that we have here in Springfield is an externality to the intermodal system that the federal government funded in Joliet. And we need you to see the solution to Springfield's problem as part of that intermodal project. We need you to finish the job that you started with the intermodal system in Joliet by getting the trains moved off of 3rd Street in Springfield.
So I guess you will give us some additional recommendations.
I think the recommendations for Springfield are already part of the Federal Railroad Administration's record of decision. Now what we need is the funding to get the trains off of 3rd Street and onto 10th Street.
All right. Thank you. One last question. On 45G, which is the short line, Mr. Powell, we didn't pass the last year, and it's up again this year. What is the problem? Because we all realize that it's important to get additional, not necessary resources, but so that the short lines can invest in the system. What is it? What's the barrier?
I think the number one thing for us is just keeping up with wear and tear and being able to maintain our ability to handle 286,000-pound cars. You know, there are opportunities out there. As you mentioned, there is the RIF program. We're applying for a Tiger grant right now, and it's somewhat of a ponderous process, but it works. You know, we have a 115-year-old bridge that we have to replace. It's like the weak lane in the chain, and you know, really, I think just making those processes easier is really what's going to help us more than anything. And 45G is big for us as well. It helps us invest an additional about $1 million a year in our railroad.
And looking at the system, I mean, there are so many bridges that's over 100 years old that we need to invest in, you know, the infrastructure in this country, and we're crumbling. I mean, the engineers say we are D+. We need that investment, and, you know, the federal government plays an important part, but it's the federal, state, local, and private.
Yeah.
And so where's your position, or any of yours position, on what we need to do as far as federal investment in the infrastructure? Madam Secretary?
Certainly. I think, as I mentioned earlier, one of the most important things to think about as we go forward is that we consider our transportation system as a whole. As we look at the funding issues, obviously there's going to be funding issues because of federal motor fuel taxes, like our state motor fuel tax is going to be challenged going forward because of alternate fuel vehicles, hybrids, those types of things, and then the increased CAFE standards going to 25 miles per gallon, or 54 miles per gallon by 2025. That's going to absolutely have a significant impact, again, not only at the federal level but also at the state level. So as we begin the conversation, and I know the conversation has started with the T&I committee as a whole, and then with this committee as directed towards rail, we really need to talk about how it all works together, and the solution that we come forward with that needs to be a multimodal solution. Here in Illinois, we have some other challenges that we have to deal with first before we really start talking about our transportation funding challenges. The pension issue, obviously, I think is something that's been reported nationwide as a challenge for us, and working through that has to happen before we can really start looking at our transportation funding issues. But we look to what other states have done in terms of Virginia and Maryland, looking at a sales tax approach to the funding their transportation system. Here in Illinois, the Transportation for Illinois Coalition proposed a package at the end of our legislative session last month that would also have a wholesale tax on motor fuel. We have not taken a position on any of those things, but I think it's important to really consider the whole of the alternatives, and then when we do so, to apply it across modes.
All right, we're running out of time. I had a question for you, Mr. Erickson, on the intermodal, but I think it was very adequately addressed by Chairman Denham, and so thank you for what you do. I'll tell you, it was ironic the last time I visited your facilities with my old boss, Mr. Shimkus. I got a call asking where I was. Well, I happened to be sitting at a rail crossing watching ADM car after ADM car go by me. So I blamed you, and but it shows commerce. It shows how important the rail system is to the folks in Decatur that I represent, and the jobs that you provide through ADM. So thank you for your long-term vision there too, and Mr. Powell, thank you for the kudos on the short line rail tax credit issue. It's very important to my district, and I'd like to ask if a short 2-minute answer, how important is that rail credit, that short line rail tax credit, to you being able to hire individuals throughout Illinois and create the jobs that politicians like us keep talking about?
I think there's definitely a ripple effect that it's not directly tied into hiring, although for construction jobs it is directly tied in. You know, there's a bridge over the Embraw River near Newton, Illinois, for instance, that we completely replaced last year. You know, again, that tax credit goes a long way to allowing us to spend a couple $1 million to completely replace a bridge. Those are construction jobs right there, of course. The other factor is that when we're able to build up our infrastructure to handle those 286,000-pound cars, it makes us more competitive. It makes Illinois businesses more competitive, and therefore we can hire more people, and we have been steadily hiring people due to new business over the last few years, especially on the west end of our railroad. So there are direct ties to that, yes.
Well, thank you. We're hoping that continues to move forward in the process. Secretary Schneider, it's great to work with you. Great meeting with you a month or so ago, and talking about how important transportation issues are to our state. And also, I look forward to partnering with you as a new policymaker in Washington, and thank you for your many suggestions today. I would urge you to leave here today and work with your staff to ensure that if you have some innovative ideas and approaches that we can utilize throughout our discussions to make it easier on you to move these large projects forward, we stand ready to help. I mean, we're not a hindrance, we're a help, and we want to make sure that we take your ideas and put them into action. And I mentioned your staff. As a former staffer who sat in the back of the room for Congressman Shimkus for 16 years, I really appreciate the work they do, and I want to give a shout out to my good friend who gave me all the information I ever needed and more when I called IDOT. It's Jeff Bell in the back. So Jeff, thank you for the many years of service you provided. And I want to say thank you to my transportation staffer who helped put these panels together, Ashley Phelps. She was sitting behind me, but now she's gone. But she did a great job and does a great job on my behalf. I don't have any questions for you, Madam Secretary. I just look forward to continuing to work with you and get your suggestions. I'll end by asking Chairman Van Meter. I mentioned this to Mayor Houston earlier. We know how important the rail consolidation project here in Springfield is to this community. You mentioned the history of 3rd Street, the 3rd Street project, and how that was integrated into the initial high-speed rail plan. Now we've all been working together with the FRA to ensure that 10th Street and your consolidation project that you've been working decades on is the preferred route. We all know that funding's the issue right now, but is there anything that you've seen as a local government official that we can do better when it comes to the regulatory process to ensure that we move projects like this, like your consolidation program, through in a much more efficient and faster way?
Well, I really have to say that with respect to our experience with the process, there were perhaps some stumbles in the beginning when the folks in Washington weren't really listening to the people at the local level, but that was quickly corrected by our representatives, your former boss, and working with Senator Durbin, and I think the FRA moved our project through in record time. So we've got the record of decision. The engineering is in process. What we need is the funding to finish the job finish the project that the federal government started with this intermodal system in Joliet. We're suffering the externalities of it here in this community, and we need the federal government to finish the job by getting the trains moved off 3rd Street, moved to 10th Street.
How much do you estimate again that it's going to cost for your consolidation project again here in Springfield?
About $130 million.
130. How much do you estimate's been spent on the corridor leading up to Springfield's project?
I think
Ann might know that
$2
better.
billion, I
Is
think.
it $2 billion that's been spent on high-speed rail? And
It's 1.4 billion,
okay, 1.4 billion.
and that includes the equipment.
Right. Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for what you've done here in Springfield. I look forward to working with you and everybody on this panel to hopefully identify those funding sources, be it through rail relocation, community mitigation, whatever ideas you have, please put them forth to us, because as we begin the process of authorizing these new, the transportation reauthorization package, we need to hear from you. And it's not just today, it's in the future. So again, welcome to the 13th District of Illinois, Lincoln's District. I'm honored to represent this area, and I'm honored to represent many of you on this panel. Yield back.
Thank you. I'd like to conclude by saying thank you to all of our witnesses here. not only for the information that you presented here today, but the information that and advice that you would give us moving forward. We're, again, looking across the nation for best practices, and certainly there are some best practices to be gained here. I want to thank Mr. Davis for having us into his district, and you're right, this is an amazing state capital. So thank you for opening your doors to us and allowing us to be here today.